Imagine you are tasked with translating the most widely read ancient text in human history.
Right.
You are staring at this piece of parchment, and you come across a word for leaf. Simple.
Yeah, you would think
I
so.
mean, you picture a green thing on a tree, you write down the English equivalent, and you just you move on to the next sentence.
Mm.
But what if the ancient language you are reading does not actually have a static word for the object itself?
Oh, man.
Like, what if the language only has a word for what that object is actively doing?
That changes the entire way you read the text. I mean, it shifts your perspective from looking at a still photograph to watching a high-definition video.
It really does. Well, welcome to Reform Thinking. I am so thrilled you have joined us today. Our goal for this deep dive into the source material is to examine the, frankly, staggering linguistic relationship between a physical object, specifically a leaf, and the physical action of ascending.
Yeah, going up.
Right. We are going to trace this idea by analyzing the Hebrew lexical root, ʿālâ, and its noun form, Aleh. And when you see how these two concepts interact, you will never look at a tree the same way again.
Absolutely. And we have an incredibly tall stack of materials on the desk today.
We really do.
We are pulling comprehensive lexical dictionary entries to lay the grammatical groundwork. We are examining biblical texts that span from the opening chapters of Genesis straight through the wisdom literature and deep into the prophets.
Which is a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah. We are also bringing in some highly technical linguistic journal articles on motion verbs, along with a close reading of commentary excerpts, specifically looking at Yuka Sudo's highly regarded analysis of the book of Genesis.
So let's just unpack this right from the start. To really grasp the concepts happening in these texts, we need to begin with the physical building blocks of the noun itself. Let's look at the Hebrew word leh.
Okay.
The lexical dictionaries define it strictly as a masculine noun meaning leaf, foliage, outgrowth, sprout, or a blade of grass.
That is the core dictionary definition. And the etymology here is absolutely fascinating. I mean, the noun leh derives directly from the primary verb Aleh.
The Yakin word.
Right. That verb carries the specific sense of growing and sprouting forth or coming up on a tree. This is where the morphology, the actual shape and structure of the word gets incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I was looking at the morphology in the research, and the variations listed based on how the word functions in a sentence kind of blew my mind. Walk us through how Hebrew handles this, because it does not operate like English at all.
It really does not. English is very modular. We use separate prepositions to show relationships. We say, the leaf of the tree.
Right, 3 separate words.
Yeah, we keep our words at arm's length. Hebrew, however, relies heavily on what are called construct states to show possession or relationship. The language fuses things together. The absolute form of our word is leo, but when it is put into a construct state, meaning leaf of something, the very vowels of the word shift.
Wow.
Yeah, the vocalization changes to accommodate the relationship.
So the word physically alters its shape because it is connected to something else.
Precisely. The dictionaries list the singular construct as leh and the plural construct as leh. We see this plural construct, for instance, in Nehemiah 8.15 when they are gathering materials. But the intimacy of the language goes even further when we look at the suffixes.
This is the part that really caught my attention. Hebrew does not just say his leaf with 2 separate words. It absorbs the pronoun into the noun itself, like we see in Psalm 1.3 with the word Aleh.
Yes, Elohu translates to its leaf or his leaf. The word integrates the ownership right into the biological structure of the noun. And we see the feminine equivalent, Aleher, meaning her leaf, in Isaiah 1:30. The pronoun is physically grafted onto the plant.
I want to propose an analogy for you to consider.
Sure.
In English, a leaf is treated as a static noun. You imagine an object sitting quietly on a branch doing nothing. But the Hebrew root suggests a literal ongoing action. A leaf is not just a thing, it is literally that which ascends or the ascender. How does viewing a physical piece of biology as an act of motion alter our reading of these ancient agricultural texts?
It completely reframes how we interact with the physical environment of the text. If we look at the lexicography category, specifically LN 3.47 through 3.59, they define it as a lateral outgrowth from a plant stem.
A lateral outgrowth.
Yeah, that precise language captures the biological reality of upward and outward motion. The ancient Hebrew mind did not look at a forest and see a static painting. They saw an ongoing, aggressive process of vertical ambition.
Vertical ambition, I like that.
The Aleh is the visible result of the verb aleh. It is the physical manifestation of going up.
It is almost like the language itself is breathing. You are not just naming a part of a tree. You are describing what the tree is actively doing at that very second. The tree is pushing this ascender out into the world.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. The noun holds the kinetic energy of the verb. It is a record of an action. When you hold a leaf in your hand, you are holding a completed ascent.
Okay, if the leaf is an ascender, we have to look at where this word shows up first. We're moving from basic botany into historical narrative. The very first time we see this word is in Genesis 3.7. Adam and Eve have just rebelled, and their immediate reaction is to cover themselves.
Yes, the text uses Aleh in the construct state for the fig leaves that are sewn together to make coverings. The research notes the literal nature of a leaf here. It is defined as a green and flat part of a plant that absorbs sunlight for growth.
That is a very clinical biological definition, but it grounds the narrative in absolute physical reality. They are taking this flat, green solar panel, this ascender, and repurposing it. The ascender, which naturally reaches toward the light, is suddenly being used to hide in the dark.
Oh, wow.
They're using the evidence of growth to cover up their shame.
The irony there is staggering. But then we move forward a few chapters to Genesis 8.11. The context shifts radically. The earth has been judged by a catastrophic flood. Noah sends out a dove.
Yeah, it comes back.
Right. The dove returns to the ark, and in its beak is a plucked olive leaf.
Here's where I want to spend some serious time, because the research brings in the commentary by Cassuto from his book, A Commentary on the Book of Genesis, Part 2, From Noah to Abraham. We are looking specifically at his analysis of Genesis 8.1 through 8.14.
Cassuto's work is legendary for its attention to literary structure.
It is, but I have to push back hard on something he does here. Look intensely at the specific title Cassuto gives to this section of the flood narrative. He titles it The First Rays of Light.
He does, the first rays of light.
I need you to explain this to me, because biologically, a leaf does not equal light. A leaf is plant matter. It is chlorophyll and cellulose. Think of an analogy.
Okay.
Imagine a horrific forest fire that burns everything to ash. Months later, you are walking through the devastation and you spot a single green sprout pushing up through the black soot.
Yeah.
It is an indicator of life. It proves the soil is recovering. But you would never point to that sprout and say, look, the first rays of light. You would say, look, a plant. Why is Cassuto conflating a piece of vegetation with solar radiation?
I love that you brought that up because the sprout and the ashes analogy actually holds the answer. To understand Cassuto's logic, we have to go back to the lexicography notes you mentioned earlier. What is the definition of a leaf?
A flat part of a plant that absorbs sunlight for growth.
Right. Photosynthesis requires light. Cassuto is making a masterful physics-based connection here. The physical flat leaf of the olive branch is the visual proof that the waters have receded enough for sunlight to hit the soil.
So the leaf is functioning as a reflection of the light.
It is more than a reflection. It is the biological receipt that the sun is working again. During the flood narrative, the world is plunged back into primeval chaos. The waters of the deep conceal everything. The atmosphere would have been choked.
Completely dark.
Yeah. When the dove brings back the Aleh, the ascender, it proves that the earth has ascended out of the water. The plant life is reaching toward the sun. The leaf is the absolute first evidence that the darkness is over. It is the biological proof of light.
Okay, that completely reframes it for me. The ascender requires light to grow. If the ascender is present in the bird's beak, the light must be present on the earth. The judgment of the flood is receding.
Spot on. Cassuto uses the first rays of light to describe the theological and physical reality of that moment. The earth is breathing again, and the absolute proof of that atmospheric clearing is held in the beak of a bird, a single, freshly plucked outgrowth.
So we have the leaf as a tool of hiding in Genesis 3, and the leaf as, well, as a sign of survival in Genesis 8. From those literal usages, later biblical writers took this ascender and weaponized it as a metaphor for the human condition.
They absolutely did.
We're looking at a massive spectrum here, contrasting the positive and negative usages across the wisdom literature and the prophets.
The contrast is razor sharp. Let's look at the flourishing side first. Psalm 1.3 is probably the most famous example. It describes the righteous person like a tree planted by streams of water, and its leaf does not wither. The text uses that suffix form we talked about earlier, alohu, and Proverbs 11.28 speaks of the righteous flourishing like a green leaf.
The research specifically notes the plural construct here, right?
Yes. The plural construct meaning collective leaves, aloh. It signifies a full canopy, a complete and healthy outgrowth. The ascender has reached its full potential. The person who is rooted in the right place produces a canopy that provides shade and life.
But then the text takes a very dark turn. The research explicitly notes that outside of these specific flourishing contexts, the noun is usually fading.
The list of citations for the fading leaf is extensive and bleak. Isaiah 1.3, 34.4, 64.5, Jeremiah 8.13, Ezekiel 47.04. The prophets use the exact same biological object, but they strip it of all its vitality. They use it to describe a nation that is drying up from the inside out.
And the most intense usage comes from what the research calls the driven leaf. This is found in Leviticus 26.36 and Job 13.25. The Hebrew phrase is ḥāleh nidap terota. Here, the leaf signifies extreme fragility and absolute terror.
A leaf driven by the wind.
Think of the emotional whiplash here for a second. The identical biological object is used to symbolize absolute security in Psalm 1. A leaf that never withers, constantly drawing water and trembling terror in Leviticus 26. A leaf chased by the wind, jumping at every gust.
Yeah, that is quite the spectrum.
It is fascinating how a leaf's dependence on the branch makes it the perfect binary symbol. If it is attached, it thrives. If it is detached, it is entirely at the mercy of the elements.
That binary is crucial for understanding the prophetic literature. A leaf has zero independent source of life. Its entire existence depends entirely on its connection to the root system.
Right.
When Isaiah talks about a fading leaf, or Leviticus talks about a driven leaf, they're describing an object that has been severed from its life source. The ascender is now falling. Gravity has taken over.
The ascender is falling. That is a devastating image. The thing built to go up is now spiraling down to the dirt.
But if we synthesize these texts, we find a bridge. The research points us to a highly specific phrase from Ezekiel 47.1. The phrase is Aleh litrupa. This translates to leaf for healing.
Leaf for healing. So the object of terror becomes medicine.
Yes. In Ezekiel's vision of the restored temple, there is a river flowing out from the sanctuary. Trees are growing beside this river, and the text specifically says their leaves will not wither. We see this clearly in the second definition from the lexical dictionaries, LN 3.47 through 3.59. It defines Aleh as a branch, bough, meaning a secondary extension from the trunk of a tree, which includes the green leaves which remain on the branch.
The research points us to Nehemiah 8.15. The Israelites have returned from exile, they're reading the law, and they realize they need to gather materials to build booths for the festival. Look at the specific trees required.
Go ahead.
Olive branches, wild olive branches, myrtle branches, palm branches, and branches of thick or leafy trees. The dictionaries link this usage to related entities like the branch, a shepherd's staff, and several related Hebrew terms such as anap, ushbi, pusra, quatsir, and chardik.
It is a highly comprehensive list of agricultural extensions, and it is critical to note how the ancient Greek translators handled this massive expansion of meaning.
You mean the Septuagint?
Yeah, the translation known as the Septuagint, or LXX. They had to make difficult choices about how to convey this Hebrew concept into a Greek mindset. The research provides the Greek equivalents used for Aleh.
I want to go through those carefully.
The most common equivalent is fulon, which is used 7 times. It simply means leaf. But then we have single, highly specific uses of anabasis, antilambano, and epi. The research also mentions alternate corpus references from the Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically 1 QA column 16 lines 8 and 26, and column 18 line 25.
Okay.
This shows the ongoing active relevance of these terms in later sectarian communities.
Okay, let me stop you right there because I have a massive question about this translation process.
Sure.
How does a translator sit down and decide when Aleh means a single flat leaf, like the one sewn together in Genesis 3, versus an entire structural branch, like the ones used to build booths in Nehemiah 8? Is it purely contextual, based on what the people in the narrative are physically doing with their hands?
Language relies incredibly heavily on context, yes. Think about the logistics of Nehemiah 8. Gathering material to build temporary shelters requires substantial structural integrity.
You need solid wood.
Right. You need secondary extensions from a trunk, solid wood, covered in foliage. You cannot build a booth out of individual flat olive leaves. They would blow away.
So the physical context forces the definition to expand from the micro to the macro.
Precisely. But what is truly brilliant is how the Greek translator handled the underlying conceptual meaning. Look at that Greek word anabasis.
That is the one used only a single time in the translation, right?
Yes. Anabasis literally means going up or ascent. The Greek translator looked at the Hebrew word Aleh, which in the context of Nehemiah meant a physical wooden branch, and instead of using a standard Greek word for branch, they used a Greek word that means ascent.
Wow.
They perfectly preserve the original Hebrew verbal root. They chose to translate the action of the tree rather than the object of the tree.
That is phenomenal. They looked at a piece of wood and wrote down the act of going up. It proves that the ancient readers inherently understood the dynamic, kinetic energy embedded in this noun. It was never just a piece of timber to them.
It was an ongoing upward trajectory, which naturally pulls our discussion from the noun ōla, the leaf or branch that comes up directly into the primary root verb itself.
The verb ōla.
Yes, meaning to go up.
Let's shift our focus to the verb. The lexical dictionaries define the verb ōla very clearly: to go up, ascend.
To understand the mechanics of how this verb functions, the research brings in a highly technical journal article from Northwest Semitic Languages, Volume 43.
Okay.
It is authored by Reynoud Oosting and Janet Dyke and titled Valence Patterns of Motion Verbs, Syntax, Semantics, and Linguistic Variation.
Let's break down the concept of a valence pattern for anyone who isn't a linguist.
That's a good idea.
Think of a verb as having a gravitational pull. Different verbs require a different number of words orbiting around them to make a complete thought. If I say I slept, that is a complete thought. The verb slept has a low valence.
Right, you don't need anything else.
But motion verbs are demanding. If I say I went, your immediate question is, went where? Motion verbs require a syntax that includes a starting point, a trajectory, and a destination. How do Oosting and Dyke apply this to the physical directionality of Allah?
They analyze how these spatial semantics play out across the biblical text. With āleh, the trajectory is always vertical. The physical directionality of upward is hardwired into the syntax. And the research points out that this spatial sense of ascent has massive implications regarding the ancient biblical cosmology of the underworld, or Sheol.
The research explicitly defines Sheol as a place far beneath the earth. That spatial, geographic reality is crucial for understanding the verb.
Yes. If Sheol is physically located downward, far beneath the crust of the earth, then escaping it requires a literal physical motion upward.
It's geometry.
Exactly. I mean, the belief in a subterranean underworld made it entirely natural to use a verb for ascending as the primary way to describe coming back from the dead. The text gives us several specific, intense examples where Allah denotes this specific extraction.
Let's look at Jonah 2.6. Jonah is in the belly of the fish, and he describes going far down to the roots of the mountains, to the very gates of the underworld. But then he declares that God brought his life up from the pit. He uses the verb āleh.
We see the identical spatial language in the Psalms. Psalm 30.3 says, "O Lord, you have brought up my soul from Sheol." And Psalm 71:20 expresses the intense hope that God will bring the psalmist up from the depths of the earth. Again, the verb is āleh.
In 1 Samuel 2.6, in Hannah's prayer, she states that Yahweh brings down to Sheol and raises up.
But the most explicit reference provided in the research is Ezekiel 37.12 through 13. This is the famous, striking vision of the Valley of Dry Bones.
Right.
It is the clearest text on the resurrection of the dead using this verb. In the prophecy that Ezekiel is commanded to communicate to the scattered bones, God twice says that he will bring his people up aloft from their graves.
I want to offer an analogy here. Think of diving into a deep, dark body of water. You go too far down, your lungs are burning, the pressure in your ears is immense, and you lose your sense of direction. You cannot find the surface.
Terrifying.
And suddenly, a massive hand grabs your collar and physically yanks you upward, breaking the surface of the water so you can gasp for air. I want to ask you, if the literal direction of the verb is physical, does the text imply that resurrection is seen not just as coming back to life biologically, but as a literal vertical change in location?
The language demands a spatial shift. The text does not describe resurrection as a dormant body simply turning back on, like flipping a switch on a machine. It describes a forceful extraction. The verb makes resurrection an act of lifting.
Pulling them out.
Yes, God is physically reaching down and doing the pulling. The dry bones are in the grave, which is geographically down. To live, they must be brought up. The verb āleh ensures that salvation from death is a directional rescue. God is doing the work of pulling the dead back into the land of the living.
A directional rescue. The extraction from the pit is entirely dependent on the one doing the pulling. We have traced this route from a leaf growing upward to a structural branch reaching toward the sun to a dead body being culled from the depths of the earth.
We have.
But the research takes us one step further into what we might call cognitive and abstract ascents.
This is where the physical motion happens entirely in the mind or in unseen circumstances. The word stops acting on physical objects like wood and bones and starts acting on concepts and thoughts.
The research lists 6 highly figurative senses of the verb ḥāleh. I want to discuss these one by one because they are fascinating. First, to be remembered. The research defines this as conceived as coming up upon the mind.
When you think about memory in the ancient world, it isn't abstract. The memory is an object that rises to the surface of your awareness.
Second, to cause. This is conceived as bringing a thing up, making it happen.
If you cause an event, you are the one who pulled it up from non-existence into reality. You elevated it into being.
Third, to continue, conceived of as going up. To give us a framework for this idea of continuation as an ascent, the research brings in an article from the Tyndale Bulletin, Volume 64.
Right.
It is authored by Christopher R. Lordy and titled, "These Are the Days of the Prophets, a Literary Analysis of Ezra 1-6.
Lordy's literary analysis focuses heavily on the post-exilic writings, the period when Israel was physically returning to Jerusalem after being held captive in Babylon.
And the premise here is applying the concept of literal return and continuation to the figurative ascents seen in those writings. Returning to Jerusalem is literally an ascent. You are going up in elevation to a mountain city, but it is also a figurative continuation of the covenant.
Yes, the physical geography of hiking up to the city of Jerusalem perfectly mirrors the abstract ascent of their national identity being restored. The action is both literal and figurative at the identical moment. Their continuation as a people is an ascent.
Fourth on the list of figurative senses is to fall by lot. This is when they would cast lots to make a decision. The research says it is conceived of as coming out by assignment. Wait, casting lots is basically rolling dice. How does gravity rolling something down onto the ground connect to a word that means to go up?
That is a great observation. We think of casting lots as throwing dice down on a table. But in the ancient Near East, drawing lots often involved reaching into a jar or an urn and pulling a stone or a piece of wood out and up.
Okay.
The lot that was chosen was physically brought up, so even random chance or divine assignment was a vertical motion.
Fifth is to make it. Conceived of as going up into an abstract location. Achieving a goal is an ascent.
And finally, the sixth sense is to put. Conceived of as putting something onto something else, making it go up on the thing.
I want to zero in on that first figurative sense we discussed, coming up upon the mind, as the definition of being remembered. Consider this analogy. You drop a heavy steel object into a lake, and it sinks to the bottom, resting in the thick silt. It is completely out of sight. But suddenly, something changes its density. It becomes buoyant, detaches from the mud, and floats upward, eventually breaking the surface of the water into your field of vision. How does this spatial framework change the way we think about the very act of memory?
It is a radical departure from how modern people think about cognition. Today, we tend to think of a memory as a misfiring synapse, an electrical signal flashing in the brain, or biological hard drive accessing stored data.
Right.
But the ancient Hebrew mind physicalizes abstract concepts. In this framework, a memory is an actual object.
An object that ascends.
Yes. When you remember something, you are not just passively accessing data. An object is actively surfacing from the depths of your consciousness. It is performing an anabasis. It is going up. And we see this physicalization everywhere. The mind is a landscape, and thoughts are pushing upward through the soil of your consciousness, just like the Aleh pushes out from the branch of a tree.
That brings us all the way back to the very beginning of our discussion. The leaf and the memory share the exact same verbal root. They're both doing the identical thing. They're ascending.
The linguistic continuity is beautiful. Whether it is a plant, a dead body, or a passing thought, the language assigns them all the same kinetic energy.
Let's concisely recap the linguistic line we have drawn during this deep dive into the source material. We started with a flat green leaf in Genesis, the very first biological proof of light and photosynthesis after a catastrophic flood.
Then we looked at how that physical leaf became a binary symbol. A flourishing, well-watered canopy in the Psalms and Proverbs, contrasted with a fading, wind-driven emblem of absolute terror in Leviticus.
From there, we found the bridge in Ezekiel, where the leaf becomes medicine. And the Greek translators showed us that a structural branch in Nehemiah is defined by its upward motion, leading us directly to the primary verb of ascent.
We saw how escaping the grave is not just waking up, but a physical, vertical extraction from the underworld by a God who reaches down to pull the dead up.
And finally, we saw how that physical motion moves inward, defining how we remember and how we conceptualize the buoyancy of thoughts surfacing in the mind. The words are actively doing the work they describe.
It forces you to read the text with a heightened awareness of motion.
To close our time together, we want to leave you with a final thought to consider on your own. It builds on the source material we have discussed today, but applies it directly to your own daily life.
If the ancient Hebrew concept of a memory is something that literally ascends to the surface of the mind, and the physical loose is defined as that which ascends from the branch, how might you view the recurring, sprouting thoughts in your own mind?
Think about the things that routinely float to the surface of your consciousness. Are the memories and thoughts you actively cultivate functioning as a flourishing green leaf planted by streams of water? Or are they acting as a fading, driven leaf detached from a source of life and chased by the wind?
It is a question of what we allow to take root and what we allow to ascend.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Reform Thinking. We appreciate you spending this time with us, looking closely at the text. Until next time, keep reading and keep asking questions.